It starts like any ordinary night, but when you close your eyes, reality begins to bend. The mundane rhythm of the day fades into a distant hum, replaced by the soft, muffling silence of a home settling into slumber. Streetlights cast long, distorted shadows across the bedroom walls, transforming familiar shapes into grotesque caricatures. The gentle ticking of the clock on the nightstand seems to slow each second, stretching into a miniature eternity, a deliberate, heavy beat marking the passage of time into a realm where the rules of the waking world no longer apply. This is the precipice of sleep, a threshold between consciousness and the vast, uncharted territories of the subconscious mind. For most, it is a peaceful descent into rest, a welcome release from the burdens of the day. But tonight, for Emma, this familiar transition is a gateway to a form of terror. She has never known a place where the simple act of closing one's eyes is an invitation to something that lurks just beyond the veil of perception. The air in her room, once comfortable and still, now feels thick and heavy, charged with an unseen presence, a silent anticipation that makes the hairs on her arms stand on end. The world outside her window falls away, and the world within her mind prepares to contort itself into a nightmare landscape, a stage set for a visitor she has not invited and cannot yet see. The comforting darkness is no longer a blanket but a shroud, and within its folds a different kind of reality is waiting to awaken. Emma falls asleep, unaware that tonight will be different. Tonight, she is not alone. Her breathing settles into the deep, even cadence of slumber, her body surrendering to the pull of gravity and the softness of her bed. The last conscious thought, a fleeting worry about an early morning meeting, dissolves into the formless ether of her dreams. In this vulnerable state, her mind begins to drift through the usual, nonsensical tapestries of sleep-fragmented memories, faces of strangers, surreal landscapes that shift and melt into one another. It is a familiar, chaotic ballet that she has danced 1,000 times before. But a new element begins to intrude upon this nightly performance, a discordant note in the symphony of her subconscious. A subtle shift occurs, a change in the very texture of the dream. The colors seem to desaturate, the ambient sounds of her dreamscape muting into a low, oppressive hum. A sense of being observed begins to permeate the edges of her awareness, a primal instinct that transcends the logic of her dream. It is a feeling that does not belong to the narrative her mind is weaving. It is an external pressure, an alien consciousness imposing itself upon her own. Even in the depths of her sleep, a part of her registers the intrusion. The quiet solitude of her rest has been violated. Something has slipped through the cracks of her perception, a silent trespasser entering the most private sanctum of her being. She is no longer the sole occupant of her own mind. A presence has taken root in the darkness, a silent partner to her slumber, and the night, which began with the promise of rest, is now a shared space. She cannot move, She cannot scream. A shadow lingers at the edge of her vision. Watching, her mind surfaces from the depths of sleep, not into the gentle haze of waking, but into a state of terrifying paralysis. Her eyes, though she cannot be sure if they are truly open, or if this is merely a hyper-realistic projection of her mind, are fixed on the textured plaster of her ceiling. A frantic signal fires from her brain, a desperate command for her limbs to respond, for her fingers to twitch, for her head to turn. But her body is a leaden statue, an unresponsive vessel disconnected from her will. The command dissipates into a void, met with an immovable, absolute stillness. Panic, cold and sharp, begins to prickle at the edges of her consciousness. She tries to draw a breath, to scream, to shatter the suffocating silence with a sound, any sound that could prove she is still alive, still in control. But her lungs are frozen, her vocal cords locked in a vice. The air is trapped within her, a stagnant pool that offers no release. It is in this state of utter helplessness that she first becomes aware of it. Not as a clear shape, but as a distortion in the periphery, a patch of darkness more profound than the surrounding gloom. It is a void in the shape of a man, tall and slender, standing near the foot of her bed. It doesn't move. It doesn't make a sound. It simply exists, a silent monolith of pure dread. Its presence is a weight, a physical pressure on the air in the room, a focal point for all the terror that now consumes her. She is pinned a specimen under the unblinking gaze of an entity she cannot comprehend, a prisoner in her own body, observed by the shadow that has come to watch. Every movement is impossible. Every second feels like an eternity. She feels its eyes on her, judging, waiting. The struggle is entirely internal, a silent, violent war waged within the confines of her skull. Her mind thrashes against the invisible chains that bind her, a desperate, frenzied effort to reclaim sovereignty over her own flesh. She imagines her fingers curling, her toes wiggling, her chest rising and falling with a deep, gasping breath. She pours every ounce of her will into these phantom actions, but her body remains a tomb. The disconnect is absolute, a chasm between intent and action that feels both infinite and impassable. Time itself seems to have warped, stretching and distorting around her. The steady tick-tock of the clock has ceased, or perhaps her perception of it has been suspended. Each moment is a vast, cavernous expanse of pure, undiluted fear. A single second contains a lifetime of terror as she lies there, exposed and vulnerable. She can feel the gaze of the shadow as if it were a physical touch, a cold clinical examination that penetrates her skin, her muscles, her bones, right down to the very core of her soul. There is an intelligence in its stillness, a purpose in its silent observation. It is not the vacant stare of an inanimate object. It is the focused, deliberate attention of a conscious being. She feels an overwhelming sense of being evaluated, weighed and measured against some unknowable standard. The silence is not empty. It is filled with unspoken questions, with a heavy, patient judgment. It is waiting, But for what? For her to break? For her to surrender? Or is it waiting for the perfect moment to close the distance between them? This uncertainty is the cruelest torture, a suspended moment of horror with no end in sight. When she wakes, everything seems normal, but she knows the shadow will return tonight. The release is sudden, a violent snap back into reality. With a convulsive gasp, she draws in a lungful of air, the sensation so sharp and real it feels like her first breath. Her limbs are her own again. She bolts upright in bed, heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Her eyes dart wildly around the room, scanning every corner, every patch of darkness. But there is nothing. The room is empty. The first pale light of dawn is filtering through the blinds, casting the familiar, gentle glow of morning across the furniture. The clock on her nightstand is ticking, its rhythm steady and reassuring. The oppressive weight is gone, the suffocating silence replaced by the distant, comforting sounds of the city waking up. Everything is exactly as it should be. A sheen of cold sweat covers her body, her pajamas clinging to her skin, the only physical evidence of the night's ordeal. Her mind screams that it was just a dream, a particularly vivid and terrifying episode of sleep paralysis, a trick of an overtired mind. But her soul knows better. The feeling, the sheer, unadulterated reality of the presence is seared into her memory. It was not a dream, it was a visitation. As she sits there, trembling in the nascent light of a new day, a chilling certainty settles deep within her bones, a cold stone in the pit of her stomach. The normality of the morning is a lie, a temporary reprieve. She knows, with an instinct that defies all logic and reason, that the night is not an end, but an intermission. The shadow is gone for now, but it is not gone forever. It is merely waiting for the sun to set again. She knows it will return. And tonight, when she closes her eyes, it will be there, waiting in the darkness to watch her again.